Welcome to Public Affairs Roundtable, a discussion of current events in the nation and around the world and how they affect the people of Indiana. Here's your moderator, Larry Lough.
State legislators have for years escaped taking a stand on the abortion issue, saying the 1973 Roe v. Wade Supreme Court decision effectively tied their hands, and it had. But the new court, the Reagan court, if you will, has undone some of Roe v. Wade and very much put the abortion battlefield in the state capitals. Today on Public Affairs Roundtable, we'll discuss the abortion issue and the state battlegrounds where it will be fought. Our panelists are John Rouse, producer of Public Affairs Roundtable and a member of the political science faculty at Ball State University; Sue Waninger from Marion, president of the board of directors of Planned Parenthood of East Central Indiana; Jane Johnson, vice president of the Planned Parenthood Federation of America; and Charles Gerber, Muncie, director of Christian Counseling Services. John, legislators seem none too happy that among their agenda items for the 1990 session is going to be abortion. Very much a political decision back to the states now.
Yeah, I think, on the issue of abortion, it's very difficult to say anything that's new in a way because people tend to repeat the controversy and the problems time and time again. What I'd like to emphasize is the focus upon accountability, and the accountability not only for abortion, but the accountability of the state for other areas. For example, if you're going to say that a woman has to have a child, you would also have to focus upon child care, perhaps, for the child. You would have to focus upon welfare, and so you would have an enlarged role of the state. So I think what the Supreme Court has done in terms of the political agenda has focused upon the states in terms of politicians, but also upon society in terms of the issue of accountability. Accountability not just for perhaps birth, but also accountability for other issues, perhaps like housing and child care. These kinds of things. So what the thing I'm trying to focus upon is that there is a renewed sense of focus upon accountability.
Sue, do we have a strategy for Indianapolis come January?
The strategies are being developed, and the coalitions are pretty much already in place for dealing with the legislators and the legislature starting in January. We are beginning work. I know myself, I've already called my folks and told them where I stand on things. And I think what we're going to see, and you've probably heard it before, but the people that have been pro-choice have been fairly forgiving with their votes since 1973. We'll vote for someone who may not have taken a stand that is pro-choice, but because we consider them reasonable people and we support their views in other areas, would vote for them. I think probably you're going to see less of that. You're going to see the pro-choice majority of people in this country asking their legislators to put their money where their mouth is and vote for choice.
Jane, is Planned Parenthood confident that, in fact, Roe versus Wade, even though it has been diminished by the recent decision, that states are going to continue to allow abortion, or I assume it's going to be a real fight?
I think it'll be a real fight. I think ultimately states will have abortion laws that permit women to exercise this important right. But I do think it will be spotty and chaotic and difficult. And I think in terms of Indiana, I'm persuaded that Indiana, like many other states that really don't have very progressive services for pregnant women now, certainly would have to make some enormous turnarounds if they were going to assure that, for example, women in this state get adequate prenatal care. So it seems unlikely, given history, that this state could dare to make abortion illegal, given that they have not demonstrated any real interest in women and their children who are carrying pregnancies to term now.
Charlie, do you welcome this door that's been opened by the Supreme Court?
Oh, greatly, and I agree with John, because I think this is going to be the greatest single-issue voting in 1990. It's going to be single-issue voters. We're going to vote for one specific area on how they stand on abortion versus pro-life.
Is that good, though? I mean, single-issue campaigns, single-issue legislatures?
So good or bad, it's still going to occur. I think that because of what's happened, because of the political campaigns, both pro-choice and pro-life, you're going to see a lot of single-issue voting.
It's not really a Democratic versus Republican issue. I mean, that's one of the things that when it gets in the legislature, it's going to be a difficult fight for every individual legislator, I think.
I think so, and I do think, as Sue pointed out, that we've been forgiving. We certainly have not held sufficient feet to the fire on this issue because we believed and continue to believe that this is a constitutional right, the Supreme Court's behavior notwithstanding. And because we believed in the court and we believed in this constitutional right, it was not always necessary to hold legislators as accountable as they will now be held. There's no question about this. Women are not going to have these rights stripped away, and they will fight for them, and they'll recover them, even if indeed in some states they lose them temporarily.
You know, I think the focus is obviously going to be in the state legislatures, but the problem is how will Right to Life and how will Planned Parenthood groups frame the issue? Both groups have their negative images. And so with the majority, how will each group frame the issues? And I think the group that is going to be the telltale group will be corporations. For example, where will the Chamber of Commerce crowd go? In other words, the Chamber of Commerce crowd, the big business people who do not want state intervention, now you have state intervention for other kinds of programs, prenatal care, child care, and so forth. And my perception is that the Chamber of Commerce group is giving lip service to pro-choice people. In other words, for the last 17 years, they've said, oh, don't worry about this. It's not really going to be an issue. Now, but the question I have is it women politically, and I want to be careful about how I say this, and have been passive. And I'm not so sure that women are going to be active enough politically to change this issue. Perhaps you have comments on this.
Well, I do, because I think that where you're going to see the difference, I mean, because there are women who are not pro-choice, as you know. What I have observed, however, over the past few years, and certainly in the more recent past, that this is going to be an issue that's ultimately going to be solved and carried by women who are strong, healthy, women with good images of themselves, women who understand their rights. And this is a growing group. This is going to be on your college campus. This is going to be your business women. It's going to be your women who have achieved as a result of having control of their fertility and to be able to manage their fertility. These are the women who are ultimately going to win this fight.
But if women in corporations would go to the chief executive officer and say, Mr. Chief Executive Officer, this is our consensus. Now, I'm not so sure that women in general have a consensus on this issue. Perhaps you think so. If those women would go to the head of the corporations and say, we want pro-choice legislation, IBM, corporations in Indiana would have no choice except to influence the legislature either pro-life or pro-choice.
If there was a coalition.
If there's a consensus.
If there's a consensus among women. But then again, are you talking about economic boycotts? You're talking about women who sit on boards of directors?
Absolutely. All of that.
But there's no consensus.
But I'm not sure there is a consensus for pro-choice.
Sue, Planned Parenthood certainly is going to be at the focus, I would think, of this issue, particularly since the Right to Life movement has, I guess, labeled Planned Parenthood as pro-abortion. What's the debate going to do for the image of Planned Parenthood?
I think probably it's difficult for us to imagine being more in the forefront than we have been over the last 8 years, because anytime the choice issue has come up, it's been Planned Parenthood that's been in the forefront. I think probably what you're going to see in terms of our image is that, speaking from the experience that I have had since the April March, when I came back to my community, I was inundated with comments from people from all walks of life, and also lots of people that were in business, physicians, people who were on the chamber board, speaking specifically of women, but it was also men, who said to me for the first time, do you really believe that they're going to take this away from us? Do you really believe that's possible? I think people have been so complacent, but there is a vast number of people out there, only minutely represented by the hundreds of thousands of people that marched in Washington, that believe that we have to galvanize into action, and I believe you will see a consensus.
Charlie, do you think the opinion of the American people is represented by Planned Parenthood?
No, I really don't. Surveys have shown that there are many people who are against abortion. There are many people who are against the convenience abortion, which is, some statistics have shown it's 95%. And I think, I agree with what you're saying. There's going to be groups galvanized, but there's going to be groups that galvanize against the abortion issue as well. They're going to fight just as hard or even harder. You're going to find groups that get together and fight for pro-life, fight for the baby, fight for the unborn. And you're going to find the same pressure that you said the educational people put on and the financial people. In Michigan in 1972, before they legalized abortion, they had a vote about abortion, if they would make it legal in Michigan. 2 areas voted yes. All the other communities voted no. The 2 areas were Ann Arbor, which is the educational community in Michigan, and then also a place called Bloomfield Hills, which is the financial district out of Detroit. And I think you're going to find that a lot of groups now, a lot of cities and people and corporations are going to fight against the abortion issue.
Yeah, I think there's no doubt that the political middle is shifting, because as you have these 2 groups who try to get the politicians to support them, without question, the political middle is shifting. Now, we don't know for sure where it's going. But let me get back to accountability. It seems to me that Right to Life has the focus upon the accountability of birth, but they're not saying, let's go out and raise taxes for prenatal care. Let's raise taxes for welfare provisions for those who don't have the means to bring people up in life. So it's kind of a conception to birth kind of focus. However, Planned Parenthood, seems to me, does not focus upon, in terms of accountability, upon abortion. They focus upon birth control, but not someone in society has to be accountable for the abortions that we have in this country, 1.5 million each year. So it seems on one hand that Right to Life does not show accountability for paying more taxes. On the other hand, Planned Parenthood and the pro-choice people, who's accountable for those abortions?
Well, I don't know that any single person is, John, but I think one point you raised that I think is valid is consistency. The need for abortion would, in fact, be diminished if we had improved birth control methodology, if we had comprehensive sexuality education, if we were more open and honest about our sexuality and didn't send such mixed messages. But the lack of interest in children after they are born is the most remarkable aspect to me of the people who are anti-choice. It would seem, if we were looking for consistency and accountability, that people who are anti-choice would be the people who would be lobbying your state legislature for prenatal care. I mean, the fact that women in this state, in this town, in this county, cannot be guaranteed prenatal care seems to me would be outrageous for people who label themselves anti-choice. So that I do look for consistency. Planned Parenthood, on the other hand, does more to prevent the need for abortion than any organization that I know of. Most of our patients are given contraceptive care. We lobby heavily for improved birth control methodology. We lobby heavily for comprehensive sexuality education. And we are blocked at the doorstep of the legislators and of the schools by people who are anti-choice. They don't want people to be knowledgeable. They aren't interested in better methodology. So that I suspect, indeed, that the motive is often anti-sex, anti-women, rather than pro-life, as these people label them.
Charlie, the pro-life movement seems to be presenting and has presented part of its credibility problem, I think, an incomplete package. Yes, they oppose abortion, but they don't move, as Jane said, in the directions that might head off a debate about abortion to begin with. That is comprehensive sex education, that is contraceptive care. It seems to be an awfully incomplete package, and Right to Life seems to, my perception, have a credibility problem where it is against abortion, but also against contraception.
Well, I think you talk about the credibility. I think they're doing more to help mothers who want to keep their kids. You're finding more places that are having nurseries, and more places that are offering maternity care, more places that are giving clothing banks, more places that you're finding new homes opening up for young unmarried mothers who are supporting the issue to keep your kids. So I think the credibility that you're seeing, that the lack that we have, will be changing. You know, right here in Muncie, there's 3 clothing banks for maternity, you know.
Well, I know
women are getting some things that they do need to keep their children.
Certainly a strength of the pro-life movement is in the Catholic Church, and which seems to obviously to be staunchly also against, the church anyway, against contraceptive care. That's going to be a difficult issue for, I think, pro-lifers to settle.
See, I don't think the church is against contraceptive care. I think the church is against irresponsible contraceptive care. You know, the idea that you need permission to get your ears pierced and not permission to get contraception and an abortion just rubs me the wrong way. I mean, if a child can't make a decision about getting his ears pierced or her ears pierced, how can we say they have the mental capacity to make a decision about birth control, about abortion?
Yeah, it would seem, the latest figures I saw, 31% of the people who have abortions are also Catholics. And so there's also responsibility, accountability for churches. And the way I've phrased it oftentimes is that churches, which are middle-class institutions, don't want to get down in the mud of life, down in the mud. I mean, the churches have become such middle-class institutions that they don't want to deal with these controversies.
But,
go ahead.
But at the same time, the government, through not-for-profit corporation entitlements like 50C3, has told churches, you can't lobby. You can't go and do these things. With my corporation, I can't lobby as a Christian counselor. I can't lobby with Christian counseling services because they'll pull in my tax exemption status. They've done that in California, at least with 2 Catholic schools or 2 Christian schools.
No, I'm not sure. You say you cannot lobby?
As an organization, they will not allow you to lobby for political issues.
Well, that's news to me.
So is the Indiana legislature going to deal with this issue in 1990? Or is it going to be Planned Parenthood's approach to just avoid anything from happening?
Oh, I think they probably are going to be dealing with it in 1990, or at least they're going to make an attempt to deal with it. From all that I've heard and read and when I've been talking to people, there are definitely going to be bills presented in the 1990 legislature. I don't think that can be avoided, nor from my position should it be avoided. One of the people that I talked to, who is a state representative, said something that I'm sure every state representative would like to do. He said, I think it ought to be decided by a referendum, which obviously would then again take them right off the hook again. And I don't see that would be a possibility, but I would not be surprised but that some states would do that, would try to turn it right back to the people. It's a very difficult position that we're putting people in, because it's very difficult for a legislator to read what is the true representative position of his constituency. Because I believe a majority of people in this country, and I don't think there's any poll that any valid poll that would tell you otherwise, believe that abortion should not be illegal. I mean, most people believe that abortion should be available. As to the circumstances under which that abortion should be legal, that's where we have the majority of questions. There's a small minority, I believe, on both ends of the spectrum, and very large number of people that are in the middle as to when the circumstances, whether abortion should be illegal under every circumstance or available under every circumstance. But I think that we're talking about the end of the spectrum, and the vast majority of people are in the middle somewhere.
Well, of course, that brings another question to legislators, too. Should they then vote what they believe is the opinion of the majority of the people, or should they do what they think is right for the people?
I suppose that's what legislators face every day whenever they make decisions. And it's a valid conflict, actually, and I don't think they ought to be let off the hook. But I think it's interesting when we talk about the possible criminalization of abortion. The evidence is very clear that women will have abortions whether they are legal or not. The issue, to a great degree, has to do with the health and welfare of women. And the thing that was particularly striking about the Webster decision was its lack of concern with women. It was cold and cynical and rarely mentioned women. And this is a right that women have exercised in this country for 16 years and in New York State for 19 years. And women in countries where abortion is illegal have abortions. In fact, in countries like Mexico, as many as 50% of their maternity beds are filled with women who've had illegal abortions. So that when people criminalize or attempt to criminalize abortions, they basically are saying to women, we really don't care if you put your life on the line, but we think you need to be punished. And that, I think, is a part of this whole debate that I find the most outrageous, that there should even be legislators sitting somewhere making a decision about what ought to happen in terms of a woman's right to make this determination. It outrages me.
If I can get back to my favorite theme, accountability again, in the Planned Parenthood, in the whole concept of responsibility for birth and sexual behavior, society seems to put so much responsibility upon females. Again, getting back to the lack of accountability by our corporate structure. Our whole structure, for example, one fast food restaurant almost advertises how young people can get together to have a romantic kind of relationship. The whole Madison Avenue concept flows to this issue of abortion in a sense, but yet it's the responsibility of females in our society. So again, it seems to me that women have some sort of responsibility to focus back upon the corporate life in our society in terms of getting male corporate executives to pay attention to this issue of birth, pay attention to this issue of sexual behavior, which Madison Avenue refuses to do. So my point is that in the women's movement on the pro-choice side, it seems like there's an abundance of women at the leadership positions, whereas in Right to Life, there seems to be an abundance of men talking about issues that are essentially reproductive when it comes to female responsibility.
That's incredibly and obviously continues to be true. I often think, what kind of legislation, what kind of reaction there would be in this country if indeed the Supreme Court had been dealing with something having to do with male sexuality, you know, an amendment to the Constitution that said that if indeed a man ever caused an unwanted pregnancy, he might not ever again be able to have sex. I mean, you know, they would laugh the Supreme Court out of existence. It continues to be true that women who bear children are also the ones who, the court behaves as though this is a unilateral activity, that there is no involvement in men. The only time we see men is standing in front of clinics shouting at women about being murderers. And it is incredible, and it is such a lack of consistency that people who are in every instance, so far as I can tell, responsible for these conceptions really have no credibility, because this woman becomes then the person that's blamed, the person who is told what she must or must not do with her life. So when you talk about corporate America, John, I would not suggest that women ought to put pressure on the leaders. They ought to become the leaders, because part of the problem that we're having is the lack of women in leadership positions where these decisions are made.
Charlie, if this is so much of our society, if in fact abortion is, and an Indiana poll showed that 68% of those questioned favored leaving abortion laws alone, if sex is part of the Madison Avenue mentality, if in fact, well, I guess the question is, if it is so much a part of our culture, a part of our society, it's so accepted, is it wise to make laws that prohibit it?
Well, let me go back to a point that was made just a minute ago. You talk about the health of the mother. And the Center for Disease Control in 1985, in a report called Abortion Surveillance, said that 48 women died of illegal abortions in 1972. 48. A lot of the statistics you see are the effects of what the women go through in the illegal abortion. What about the effects of the legal abortion? You know, I've never heard Planned Parenthood say, yeah, you have these problems when you have an abortion. You have problems with your kidneys, you have problems with your colon, you have problems with disease, you have problems with scarring. You know, I hear the Planned Parenthood say it's these women who go into the back alleys who are really hurting, all right? I think it's both. I think the women who have those abortions too are as scarred, if not more scarred, because of illegal abortion. You know, and going with what you said about, yeah, I think it's wise we overchange the law. Just because it's acceptable doesn't mean it's right. Just because our society says it's okay to do certain things doesn't mean it's right.
Charlie, if I could get back to some of my Baptist theology, there was a concept that I was taught called the priesthood of the believer. And the priesthood of the believer allowed individual people to make decisions about matters of theology and things of this sort. Do not Christian groups feel kind of uncomfortable with the idea that moving away from this concept of the priesthood of the believer in this kind of situation, you're moving towards a kind of situation where the family's not getting this done, the church is not getting this done, and now Christian groups have to depend upon the state to get this issue done? I mean, isn't that kind of an uncomfortable kind of feeling that the state's going to save people?
Yeah, I have a hard time with that. You know, it says in 1 Peter that we are priesthood of all believers, and I think one of the problems comes is with sex education. It should be taught in the homes, and I wish parents would not be afraid of it. You know, you don't have to feel comfortable about a subject to teach it. And too many parents, I think the reason why schools teach sex education is because the parents just don't do it.
And we wish that teens wouldn't have sex too, but they do. So what's the solution? To keep preaching at them, or do you accept it as part of society and have a good comprehensive sex education program in the schools, provide contraceptive care to teens?
Could we do all three?
Well, probably.
You know, I don't think groups preach. I don't think groups use guilt to get people to think about keeping their children, because guilt goes away very quickly, but I think a lot of groups focus on the consequences. You know, what is it? 65% of all women who've had abortions within 6 months are pregnant again. You know, so you can't look and say, gosh, they learned their lesson, you know.
Well, I think that's probably the bottom line here is who's teaching them the lesson. Yeah. I mean, I think that goes back to the whole area of punitiveness. First place, that data is simply not accurate. And the Surgeon General of the United States was asked, did you know, by the Reagan administration to demonstrate that, in fact, there were serious outcomes to abortion, and the data simply does not demonstrate that. And so that we know that women's health has been significantly improved in this country because of the availability of legalized and safe abortion. And anybody who wishes to push them back into self-induced or clinically unsafe abortion cannot pretend to care about women. And I think also the point that you raised, this whole issue of what is right and the attempt to legislate that or to have that come through the Constitution is getting very close to the establishment of religion. There are legitimate religious groups in this country who simply do not share that point of view. And so that this whole concept of what is right and what is wrong is indeed, in my judgment, a decision individuals have a right to make. And to suggest that one group has the idea and the rest of us must follow tends to set back, it seems to me, and really puts the 13 on the end of our 213th birthday, maybe one of significant bad luck, because it does not talk about independence and what I understand the Constitution to be.
Jane, you get the last word. We're out of time. Thank you, John Rouse, Sue Weininger, Jane Johnson, and Charlie Gerber for being with us here today. I'm Larry Lough. Thank you for being with us.
Public Affairs Roundtable is produced in the studios of WIPB Channel 49 on the campus of Ball State University. The producer is John Rouse. Listener comments are welcome.